for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about some of the tips I have for hosting public art calls in CaFÉ and some tools that will be helpful. So the key items we'll cover include submission guidelines for RFPs and RFQs. We'll also talk about the difference between the two of those. We'll talk about collecting materials using the application custom questions, jurying tips for public art proposals, and we'll also talk about notifying artists and other tips for promoting your public art projects. So I'm going to start off today by talking about the two different types of public art calls. Usually there are two main types: RFQs, which is request for qualifications, and RFPs, request for proposals. This information might be very familiar to you, but we're just going to go over the types and how they might play into CaFÉ a little bit differently. So RFQs are used when an entity is looking to select an artist based on their or their studio's body of work. RFPs, on the other hand, require artists or studios to submit a proposal for this specific opportunity in addition to examples of their previous work. According to the Americans for the Arts, both types are commonly used, but RFQs are generally endorsed above RFPs and considered best practice because requests for qualifications are often seen as being more fair to artists. That being said, there are advantages and disadvantages to both types, and each can be used in their own ways to give free rein to the artist while ensuring the artwork is appropriate for the public and commissioning agency. To add to our comparisons here, some of the materials gathered from artists for an RFQ could include info about their training, previous work, evidence of their ability to create a public artwork piece, as well as the work samples themselves. RFPs, on the other hand, may gather those same materials in addition to gathering concept drawings, official proposal sketches, and/or written statements about the concept. RFQs are used for almost any type of public art project and require minimal expenditures of time and money from the artists. RFPs are often used for specific projects such as sculptures on loan programs, where the artwork submitted by artists may have already been created, or public art projects with extremely limited sites. Unlike RFPs require a more substantial amount of work by the artist to submit their proposal. Now that we've gone over the basics of these types of public art calls, I'll show you some tips for how to set up your RFQ or RFP in CaFÉ. It's important to set your prospective artists up for success with clear instructions and requirements. So one of my first tips for you is to always have a draft of the prospectus internally and get all of the information ready to go so you can easily copy it into CaFÉ. So we'll start as usual in the administrator side of CaFÉ. Once you log in, you'll select your event from the drop-down menu and go to the call editor. And where we'll start is where you should start, in the event information tab here at the top. This is where you'll enter the info about your prospectus in your public art project. This tab isn't for the application itself, but will list the submission guidelines and the requirements the artist will need to prepare before they apply to the call. So first here, the call type is going to be important. The most used call type for public art calls is, of course, public art. We also have a call type called proposals, which you can certainly use to differentiate from the more broad public art group. We have some other fields or options that you can look into. Public art is probably the most popular, so if you want to make sure you're reaching artists that are specifically looking for public art calls, be sure to choose public art. And then another field towards the top that's important is the eligibility field. This will be used to determine eligible artists based on their location. It actually doesn't use to determine them, but it shows the artist if they're eligible based on local, regional, national, or international eligibility. And then, of course, the city and the state of where the project will be taking place is important, so make sure you include that. Here, the short description is where you'll enter a short summary of your prospectus. This is going to be shown on the call listings page, so I'm going to switch over to our artist side here. This is the list of calls, and with our demo call here in the search results, and you can see that the short description is the body of text that's displayed here. So this will help artists see at a glance the goal and the nature of your call, and it helps them decide if they're eligible to apply. In addition, this will also help them entice them to apply to your call. So you want to include some key details here, such as the site location, project goals, budget, and anything else that you want them to know right off the bat. Of course, you'll explain these later in the long description. The long description is the primary space where your entire prospectus will live that details the full description of the project, eligibility information, and the submission requirements. If we go back to our artist side, the long description is what displays when the artist clicks more info. This is called the call details page, and it's what the artist sees when they first go over the info for your call. This is also the landing page for your call URL, which is listed at the top, and that can be retrieved on your call editor right here above the front end status. So if you use this URL and copy and paste it on your website or any social media posts, it will direct them to the landing page, which is this one, the call detail page. So for your long description, be sure to include anything and everything that will be related to the artist when considering the opportunity and applying to it. Provide a full and clear list of the materials the artist will need to apply with so they can know what to prepare ahead of time before applying. In this call, they are asking for a resume, letter of interest, confirmation of eligibility, and as expected, up to 10 images of completed works. This gives the artist a preview here of what the application itself will actually look like. Items for this section may include project goals, timeline, site location information, as well as budget information. So this is a good space to enter all of that information, as well as you can choose to include information about your organization so they can learn more about you. And then we're going to skip back a little bit and talk about the floor/site plan image. So here you can upload an image or a PDF file of the public art side. On the artist side, when they view it, they can click View Site Details, and it will take them to the image or the PDF that you include. So on our example call here, you'll see they've included a satellite map of where the site, the mural, will be located in. You could include a blueprint of the site here, or maybe an image of the wall or space itself. Moving on, the legal agreement is where you'll enter the terms and conditions the artist must adhere to. Be sure to include any city restrictions, contract information if applicable, and it's another good spot to reiterate your eligibility. So if we go to the artist side again, when the artist clicks Apply Now, they'll be taken to the legal agreement. If they click Agree, that means they have read and agreed to the terms, and they cannot apply to the call without agreeing. So this is your chance to cover yourself by entering the important legal information. So you click Agree, and that takes them to the application. The next important thing to pay attention to on your call editor is the jury type. The jury type, as I've mentioned in many webinars before, is really that important because it's a setting that cannot be changed after the call goes live. For public art calls, whether you're running an RFQ or an RFP, please make sure your jury type is listed as Jury by Artist. This is also known as scoring by application or artist. This will mean that all images submitted by each artist will be grouped together, and the juries will view and score these images as a whole, as opposed to scoring each image individually. I don't see many or any calls for that matter that are for public art using jury by artwork because the selection committee is likely selecting artists for a shortlist based on their body of work, not selecting specific works that they would use as you would for an exhibition. If you're running a sculpture on loan public art call and choosing specific art pieces, I would still use the jury by artist or application, as it's also known, jury type, so that the images, which likely consist of multiple views of one sculpture, are actually scored and grouped together as a whole. You'll see this jury type in action later in this webinar. So those are the key elements of the event information tab you'll want to pay attention to when hosting a public art call. Of course, there's other things we've gone over here that I haven't gone over. So just make sure that you've entered all your information in the event info tab that you want artists to know. I'm going to show you how to build out the application itself. To do this, we'll go to the Application Editor tab here, and this page is what lets you customize the application for your call. The features you use on this page may vary depending on the type of public art call you're hosting. But as a reminder, we suggest for most cases that organizations host a request for qualifications. This can be because it's difficult to ask artists to create proposals without compensation and without a better understanding of the site and surrounding community. Many organizations only ask for proposals once they've narrowed down the applicants and moved on to the shortlist stage. The top of the Application Editor tab is the Artist Statement section. So you can change this setting to active to require an artist statement from each applicant. You can enter any additional instructions and set a character limit if you need. And then to make changes to this section, click the Modify button. As you can see on our example call, we'll go to the application itself. This call is using the artist statement section to collect a letter of interest. If you didn't want to use this section to collect the letter of interest, you can actually build it out in the custom form questions section. So this section is the main area to build out your application questions. This is where you'll set up the requirements for the artists and gather materials like resumes, biographies, etc. So there's different types of questions you can create. You can see I have a couple different ones here. For example, you can have a checkbox format question, and that allows you to enter in answer options the artist will choose from. In this example, the question is a simple check or uncheck if the artist is residing in the eligible region. Since this question is marked as required, it's more used as a checkpoint to prevent ineligible artists from applying. When creating this custom question, I'll go back here, click either Build New Question or Edit to edit an existing question, and then you'll be taken to the question editor. Here you'll notice the title at the top. This is internal only and will not be seen by the artists. It's only used to refer to the question on the previous page. The question text box here is where you'll actually write out the question that appears on the application. So you can enter this here. You can mark if the question is going to be required or not. You can also change the order the question will appear on the application by changing the number in the priority. You can also opt to hide it from the jurors. And then here is where you will write out your answer option. If you chose multiple options, you would have multiple option 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. And you would enter your answer options. Here in the information text box is additional help information that will appear as a help bubble on the application. So if you go onto this side, you'll just see this little help bubble, and you'll see that that's the same text that you enter in on the second text box there. So if you make any changes or once you create your question, just click Create or Update. So if you're collecting resumes, for example, or CVs like we have here, you want to create a file upload type. This is so that the artist can choose and upload a file from their computer. If an artist is applying with a team, be sure to ask that the artist submit and merge the resumes into one file because each file upload question can only accept one file. And there's a list of accepted format types, which is preloaded for you into the question editor, and it's preloaded into where the help bubble will appear. So this is the accepted file format types that are allowed. So another question type that might be helpful for you is the text box type. So you can create a text box to ask for concept-specific questions or maybe ask for a list of references. That being said, do not ask for proposal sketches or images in this portion of the application. Those should be collected in the work samples section, where the artist actually uploads the image of their past work samples and their proposal images. In the application custom questions, you'll only want to collect the supplemental materials like the resumes, references, etc. Another tip I'll share here is that if you wanted to reiterate or clarify your work sample requirements or the media requirements, you can add an informational only question type. This will appear as read only, and if you place the order by putting it in the right priority, it will appear at the bottom of the application. So we can go here. So you can see I've added this informational only since there's no question type or question associated with it, but the text appears right above the work samples section. So this is a good spot to just make sure that the artist is uploading the images, and you can tell them if it's an RFQ, you can ask them not to include conceptual drawings. If it's an RFP, maybe you want to reiterate that out of the 10 images, 5 must be proposal sketches or drawings. Since the artist will see it on the application itself, they'll have no excuse not to follow the directions when they get to this work samples section portion. And then once you've built out all of the question types, I do recommend you click on the backend preview application questions. You'll see this is what it looks like exactly as we've been going over so far, since it will show you a preview of what it appears like to the artist. You can make sure you've got the right question type chosen for each question. You can make sure that the required questions are bolded. Here is where bold means required. And you can also make sure that it's all in the right order. So that's just a tip to make sure you preview it. On the application editor, we've also got the categories editor. I'm not going to go into details about this. I've seen a few public art calls use it, but you don't have to use it. If you wanted to differentiate the applications and have artists identify under certain categories, you can set this to active and click go. Then you would be able to enter in 2 or more categories. And then the final section of this page is where the media requirements are entered. Only CaFÉ staff can help you change this, so if you need to update it, just feel free to reach out to us. This is where the minimum and maximum number of images or maybe audio and video files are determined. And they should already actually be set up when you enter your desired requirements in your new call request form. So just make sure that this is correct. For public art calls, you want to consider how many images your selection committee will actually want to review. So you wouldn't want to ask artists to submit up to 20 images when you know your committee only really wants to look at 10. And then you can always ask for more images later on in your public art process and selection process or interview stages. So set the number that you think is right for the first round of your consideration. Another thing I'll note here is that when an artist uploads their images from their portfolio, this is all the images from this artist's portfolio, when they select the certain images, know that each one of these images will already include a lot of artwork information. So if I go to their portfolio, you'll see that they will already have entered in their title, medium, dimensions, price, year completed, discipline. They can determine if it's already a public art piece. And then they can include a description here too. So unless there's information that's not included on this list here, you don't need to ask for it on the application itself, because then it would just be redundant. Once your event information and application editor tab are complete, you're pretty much ready to take the call live. There's also the product editor tab. This is where you'll collect an entry fee, but since the vast majority of public art calls do not require a fee to enter, you can simply check to make sure it's set to 0 and that the description at least somewhat matches your call. We'll set all of this up when we create your call template, but please make sure that everything in here looks correct. While the artist doesn't pay, since it's set to 0, they'll still quote unquote buy the entry fee in order to officially submit their application. So when your call is live and you start receiving submissions to your event, they'll show up under the Events Management tab, and you'll see them in the Received status. Feel free to review the applications as they come in. You can check for eligibility. You can look into their work samples, make sure they've got all the materials that they needed to. You can do all of this before you move on to the Jury tab. We have various help guides under the Help tab here. So I'm not going to get into this section very much, but you can look into our help guides and webinars to see how to organize or how to use some of these tools on this page to your advantage. My advice for public art calls is to pay attention to any missing application materials and then give artists the chance to correct any errors before the deadline. So we are all human, and when we submit things, some things might slip by us. So you wouldn't want to miss out on the talent of an artist for a mistake that can be corrected, assuming it can be done within the time frame. So for now, we'll move on to the jury's process and cover a few items. As we've talked about, your jurying type will be set to jury by artist so that each scorecard will be complete with the artist's info, application materials, and the entire group of images they submit. So when setting up your jury, you'll want to choose between 2 scorecards. The first thing you'll do, though, is set your jury status to in progress. The scorecard, you have the choice between monitor view or projection view. Monitor view displays the scorecard in a pop-up window and shows the images against a gray background. The person scoring will view each scorecard one after another in a slideshow style of workflow. Projection format view displays the same scorecard, but this time in a separate tab or window and shows the images against a white background. The person scoring will view each scorecard one after another, but instead of a slideshow, it'll appear as a list with 20 applications per page. I personally recommend the projection view for public art calls. This is so you can easily see the application images grouped together, and then once you're done viewing them, you just have to scroll to the next one without having to click through a slideshow. And we have more information and screenshots for what this looks like on the juror side under the Help tab for the Help Guide for Jurors. We also have a webinar that goes into in depth on this. So then another thing you can do for public art calls or any call is set up a blind jury. This happens under the jury permission section here. You can click any of these to hide it from the jurors. So be sure that everything that you do check mark is what you want hidden. So for a blind jury, I would check the box next to the artist name to make sure I hide the artist name. Although if I do check this, just note that this doesn't remove the artist's name if they've included it in their letter of interest, for example, or anything else on their application. Unless you instructed them to make sure they remove their name from any text, they still might have their artist name snuck in there somewhere. But this will remove it from the application itself. You can also choose to hide application materials. Maybe something's not relevant, or maybe there's something that you don't want the jurors to see quite yet. So you can check to hide those. Just be sure that anything that you want the jurors to take into consideration, like their resume or CV, is not checked so that they can see it. And then be sure to click Save Changes to save any of these changes here. So when reviewing and scoring the works, the jurors will have the opportunity to write in any comments on the scorecard. If comments are entered, you'll see them on the jury administration page here. So you can see them here with the score. Comments cannot be seen by the other jurors nor the artists, but they can be useful for the juror to refer to their own comments or maybe communicate something to you as the administrator. So before I move on, I want to acknowledge that organizations running a public art call will all have different ways of conducting their jury or selection process. While I showed you some tips for conducting a jury in the more traditional way, where you set it up for the jurors log on to it, they view the artist's work, they assign a score, and maybe they make some comments, your organization may want to do some things differently. For example, your selection committee might meet in one room, or let's say a Zoom meeting, to view the entries all together and make their decisions. So in that case, maybe only one of you will need to log in as a juror to input the group scores. In another example, your organization might choose to go completely off CaFÉ and make your shortlist decisions or choose the one invited artist. And then in that case, you wouldn't even use this jury administration page. You might just change the status of your invited artist to invited once you decide everything out of CaFÉ. So no matter which method you go with, my advice to you would just to make sure that you return to CaFÉ and at least mark with the status here any of the applications that are going to be not invited or invited. So changing the status in CaFÉ, even if you do everything off of it, will help ensure that the artists know what status their application is in. And it'll also help you for better record keeping later on. Part of your RFP and RFQ process will be to notify the artist of the results, which is an important step to finalizing everything. This is where the communication tool we offer comes in handy. So we'll go to the Events Communication tab, and we will see the list of the status of applications here. So when you go to email the artist of the results, you will do this one for each status of invited and not invited. You'll see we don't have any applications in each status yet, but this is just showing you how to do it. This tool will help you eliminate the time it takes to craft individual emails to each of the artists and allows you to keep clean records of everything. CaFÉ will automatically attach the individualized application details to each email. All you need to do is create drafts, one for the batch of not invited and one for the batch of invited. If you're running an RFQ, be sure your emails to invite the artist to the next stage of the process includes details for what's expected of them. So for example, you'll include your congratulatory note, but you might also include details about a site visit, proposal documents needed, or info about a presentation they'll need to prepare. You'll also have a space here to include a file if you want, and that will help you if you have any documents you want to share with them. And then don't forget to include your contact information. Although we don't have any in the invited status here, I can just click on Receive to show you what the email format looks like. Basically, it's pretty simple. You just enter in your information. If you wanted to CC or BCC anyone, send yourself a copy. You'll enter your subject, your body here, and then you'll choose a file. When you're ready to send, you just click preview, and then you'll see here, if you enter your message, it will be included here. And then just know that every email is already automatically entered in with the individual artist's name. So that does all the work for you. And then you can click to send, save a draft, or go back. So that's a quick overview of the email communication tab. Of course, we do have more instructions in the help section. Once your call is ready to go, you'll want to share it far and wide and reach as many talented artists as possible within your eligible region, of course. The first tip I have for you to use the call listing URL that I mentioned earlier in the event information tab. So I'll show you again, it's just in the call editor here. And you go to event information. And then in the top here, you'll see that's your call listing URL. So you can copy and paste it, put it on your website, newsletters, social media posts, or anything like that. One note is that you can't customize the URL itself. You can always use a bit.ly URL shortener or something else like that, but that's the URL that will take you to your call details page. And then speaking of social media, if you wanted to tag us, you can. We are on Facebook and Twitter, and our handles are just Call for Entry or CaFÉ Call for Entry. We'd be happy to share any posts that we're tagged in so our followers can see them. So feel free to tag us and we'll be sure to share them out. And then another thing you can do for your projects is keep a list of contacts that list the artists in your networks and send them the call details anytime you have a new one. So maybe you have some previous public art calls that you've done. You can download their contact information and send them some info about a new opportunity. You can also keep track of public art groups in your local, regional, national networks, send them your call details, and then ask the folks to share them around. The more word of mouth, the better. CaFÉ also has its own network of artists, and we offer a promotional e-blast service. This allows you to send a targeted email directly to them. This is available to CaFÉ organizations and only available for active calls. So it's a great opportunity to reach artists that are already on the lookout for opportunities. To learn more, you can go to the Help tab again, and then we have a Reserve an eBlast section, and you'll be taken to the information page with all the details you need to know, as well as the request form. Finally, once your public art projects are completed, don't forget to share them on the Public Art Archive. The Public Art Archive is a free, continually growing and online mobile database of completed public artworks with the goal of making public art more public. It's our sister organization, also a program of West staff, and you can submit your artwork and your public art projects to be included. You can also take advantage of some of the other tools and services the Public Art Archive offers. So you can learn more about that by visiting publicartarchive.org. And those are the tips that I have for promoting your public art calls. And with that, this concludes our webinar. So I thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you learned a little bit more about how to host public art specific calls on CaFÉ. Looks like we've got a question. Can I review the definition of jury by artist? Yes, so to do this, I can actually show you in our help tab. We have a specific jury types help guide to kind of go over the difference between them. The main difference is jury by artwork juries and reviews the individual images one by one. So when an artist submits, let's say they submit 5 images for consideration for an exhibition, each of those images will be separated into individual entries. Jury by artist, on the other hand, means that when an artist submits 5 images, those images are grouped together and those will be juried and reviewed as a whole. And one score will be given to all 5 of those images, whereas in jury by artwork, each image will receive its own score. So you can kind of see this visually here. Got jury by artwork on the left, where only one image will appear on the scorecard, whereas jury by artist means that they will all be grouped together. So that's why for public art calls, you want to make sure all the images are grouped together, because you're likely looking at a body of work from the artist versus individual artwork images that will each receive their own score. So I hope that answered your question. If you have specific questions about your call and which jury type you want to use, feel free to email us and we'd be happy to help you determine which one is going to be best for you. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Be sure to join us next month.